Welcome to Data Forward, the podcast that keeps you ahead in the fast-evolving world of enterprise AI and data management. We bring you expert insights, actionable strategies, and the latest trends to help you stay on top. Ready to shape the future of data? Let's Data Forward.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Data Forward. I'm very excited today to have with me Malcom Hawker, Chief Data Officer at Profisee. Hi there, Malcom.
Good morning, afternoon, evening. I guess this could be any time. Good to see you, Ramon.
Yeah, great to have you on. So today we're going to talk about how to get data management done right. And what is that? It's going to encompass a whole load of different topics from cataloging to governance, data products, a little bit of master data management, and a little bit of data observability too. So, but before we get started, Malcom, everybody really knows you, but would love for you to give you, the listeners, your background.
Oh gosh, I won't bore everybody with the entire 30-year history. I'll do maybe the Cliff's Notes.
Yep.
I've for my entire 30 years in the workforce. It's kind of crazy to say 30 years, but it's a fact. It's actually even more than that, which is a little crazy to say at this age.
You and me both.
Yeah. I've always been in technology. Always been in software, always been in IT. And I really started my career in a product management track. I got to kind of work my way up the ladder. I became a chief product officer of a software startup based out of Austin, Texas, that was eventually sold off to a company called NetSuite. But I lead product teams, designing good products, doing product market fit, doing pricing, doing design, you name it. Building great software was something that I was really, really passionate about. And I learned a ton in that process. I actually had a chance to manage engineers. I've managed, the systems that are creating all of the data that I'm now in love with. So that was a great learning opportunity. And I made this pivot into more on the IT side of the house and the infrastructure and operations and managing IT and managing data, managing databases. I had the chance, kind of working my way back up the ladder again, had a chance to lead an IT function at a $2 billion publicly traded company out of DC. Decided that leadership was something I was really good at, but something I didn't necessarily wasn't passionate about, and made a pivot to become. This was a conscious decision actually in my 40s to say, okay, well, where do I want to be in 10, 15 years? And I decided to become more of, well, let's just call it a thought leader. Because what I'm passionate about is sharing what I know. What I'm passionate about is sharing all the experience that I've developed and communicating that, whether that it's in written form or in video form. Obviously, I'm doing this today. That led me to a path of working for a company called Dun & Bradstreet, where they gave me this lofty title of Distinguished Architect. It led me to a path to be a Gartner analyst, which was a fantastic experience. And I could never, ever replace everything that I learned over 3 years.
And that's where we
Gartner.
met at Dun & Bradstreet and then later at Gartner.
Yep. And I've parlayed that now into a CDO role with Profisee, where I could best be described as a field CDO, where I am very active in evangelism. I'm very active in our field. I'm very active in working with our clients and helping them understand why MDM, why data catalogs, why governance, why data strategy, why should we be doing these things, and the best way to approach some of these difficult challenges. So that's a lot about me. That's my story.
That's fantastic. And then you're the host of CDO Matters, which is a very popular podcast. And tell us a little bit about how that's going.
Yeah, well, you're very kind. Thank you. Yes, I have a podcast. We're on to our 62nd or 63rd episode, which is crazy. For over 2 years now, we've been publishing. Haven't missed a beat every 2 weeks. I have a mix of thought leaders. I have a mix of CDOs. My goal with that podcast is to extend the tenure of CDOs. A hard stop. That's the goal. My mission is to extend the tenures of CDOs. We know CDO tenures are still half of CIOs. We know a lot of CDOs struggle to deliver value. And my goal is just to share what I learn. I'm not selling anything. I'm not trying to push a specific agenda other than some of the opinions that I have that are fairly well formed. But yeah, we've got a lot of great guests. I provide a lot of interesting insights. I'm really focused on trying to be as provocative as I can, because I think the status quo is kind of broken and there's a better way to do things. There are different ways to do things. And the way that we've been approaching things for a while is not driving the value that we know data can bring to an organization. Exactly. So that's what I focus on the podcast.
Yeah, 100%. And the controversy, if you want to call it that, but I call it sort of more of a pragmatic, well thought out approach. This is what we're going to dive into. So one of the first topics, we recently had a conversation, and we were talking about sort of a outcome-driven approach, right? You were putting forth a really great perspective how a lot of people are just taking inventory, doing cataloging, doing governance, and a lot of large consulting firms are prescribing that.
Yeah.
But it's not really working. Can you describe why?
Yeah. Pardon me. There's a few things that I noticed while I was a Gartner analyst where I was given the honor, and I consider it that. I was speaking to no fewer than 1,500 CDOs and CIOs about what's working and what's not working. And some of the themes that I saw around things that aren't working are what I would call this very kind of obsessive, bottoms-up, inventory-driven approach to managing data, right? Where an excessive focus on data catalogs. Now, don't get me wrong. I love data catalogs. They are foundational. You need a data catalog. You need a place you need one. Metadata management is absolutely positively critical. And everybody will agree with that and everybody gets it. But what I saw time and time again, Rowan, was a new CDO would come into place. And she or he would be given this mandate, often a transition or some sort of transformational mandate, be data driven, digital transformation. We're going to change how we operate. We're going to put data at the core of it.
Yeah.
Here you go, CDO, go. And so many of them would start by doing this inventory. They try to glossary everything. They try to lineage everything. They would try to understand what's out there and get their hands around it. They would go about trying to assign owners of everything, of all of their data. And 7 or 8 months after they started, they would call me up at Gartner and I'd say, hey, how's it going? And the answer was, well, I've got half our data inventoried. We've got, a quarter of it glossaried. I'm still struggling to get access to a few key databases over here because nobody wants to really kind of play nice. And I'm having struggles with governance. Nobody's showing up to the committee meetings. Nobody wants to own the data. Everything's going sideways. Help.
Yeah.
What do I do? And so what you suggested there is the exact opposite of that. Instead of the bottoms up, kind of be a little more top down. Figure out what the business priorities are. Figure out the challenges are. Go talk to people on the business side of the house to understand how data could be leveraged to solve some really difficult problems. That's what I mean by outcome driven or business driven. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't need to do a data catalog or a glossary or a lineage. You need to do those things, but and governance especially.
Yeah.
But you only need to do those things insofar as you've limited your scope to a very specific business benefit.
Exactly.
Right? You can say, okay, I'm going to do a customer 360 with a goal of 5% improvement of cross-sell of this line of products. That's a very, very specific goal where you can put a fence around that and say, okay, what governance do I need to do that? What data do I need to catalog to do that? What do I need to do from a data quality perspective? What are the rules that I need to do? What about MDM? All those things. But you put a fence around it. And it doesn't turn into this thing that has no end where you can't even really define, okay, well, I got to do the entire governance framework because I really don't know what success looks like. That's what I mean by outcome driven.
No, that's exactly what we're seeing as well, where people are tired of just cataloging everything and just doing governance for governance sake. Right. And they also want governance to be operationalized, right? And not just sitting on the sidelines looking pretty. It's all nice and neat and it's all cataloged. So one of the things that I was indexing on when I read your post was the value, right? The value you're going to get from the outcome, and then working backwards, forwards, shifting left, shifting right, whichever way you describe it, is something key because then you're only investing the effort that drive the outcomes.
Yep. So value. The concept of value is acknowledged. I can acknowledge that to be slightly squishy, but dollars and cents most certainly are not.
For sure.
Money is not. I mean, the amount of money we put in the bank or the amount of money that we're saving, or indirectly the amount of risk that we're mitigating also translates into a financial benefit. So when I talk about value, what I'm actually talking about are dollars and cents. Yeah. The most widely held, well, maybe not the most widely held, one of the most widely held myths in CDO ranks is that we cannot quantify the business value of improvements that we make with data. It's a myth. We continue to tell it. I don't know why we continue to tell it. Probably a separate podcast in and of itself of why so many people cling to this. I do understand that the benefits are 1 degree removed, right? They're indirect. Can you say that if I spend $1 on data quality, that it's going to be $1 in the bank? No, because there are second and third degree relationships here.
Right.
Can you build like hard and fast causal models? Maybe, but those are pretty expensive. But that doesn't mean we can't measure impacts. The entire marketing function is built on something called attribution. Can you say that $1 spent on marketing is going to equal $1 in the bank? Of course we can't. There's all sorts of touch points. There's all sorts of influence that we're given. There's all sorts of opportunities to improve things like how we sell, the products we build, and on. But we can still build models to measure these things. We can do this. The joke I tell is we're in the modeling business.
Right.
And I'm not talking about like Blue Steel, like modeling. If we're telling our business that we, data professionals, cannot measure something, then as those senior leaders, the C-suite, CFO, CEO, if they're hearing that from the data leader, they've got every right to question your capabilities as a data leader.
Absolutely. Yeah, and one of the things that you brought up, I think it was a quote that said that the people who manage data don't have much data, right, to measure themselves against, which is a huge irony in my mind. So are you seeing that being more progressive relative to trying to capture the data and trying to link, right, with lineage, with things like data observability, being able to see these are the sort of sources and attributes that are being curated, and a lot of processing is improving the data quality. And these are tied to the business outcomes that actually are being delivered.
Yeah, absolutely. The little pithy quip that I give in some of my presentations, which honestly, Ramon, kind of lands a little flat. Like most people look at me and it's like it take a couple minutes to think about it. And then after the presentation, they'll come up and say, oh, okay, yeah. The pithy quote I say is that data people have no data on the value of data.
That's right.
And that's a lot of data, but it's absolutely positively true. We know it to be true. Survey after survey finds that it is not the truth. So then how do we actually do some of these measurements? You just touched on some of to me, the low-hanging fruit, which is on one, imagine this maybe like a ledger, two sides of a ledger, debit, credit. On one side of the ledger, you've got business metrics, KPIs. Right, you've got cost of goods sold, you've got days in inventory, days outstanding on an invoice. On the other side of the ledger, you've got data quality metrics. You've got completeness. You've got accuracy. You've got all of the usual dimensions of data quality. Whether there's 4, 6, 12, you pick. It's fine. They're all good. You've got the dimensions of data quality. You most certainly can link them together. You most certainly can. If I improve the accuracy of my customer data, remove a duplicate record, what impact would that have on a specific business KPI? That is the easiest approach to this, and you most certainly can build these relationships, and you can measure the value of data quality, for sure.
Yeah. Well, jumping forward, I was going to ask this a little later in our conversation and dialogue, but since we're on the topic of data quality, about a year ago, you wrote another very interesting, you could call it controversial post about master data management not requiring a huge amount of high quality data. Can you expound on that?
Well, so let's imagine a world where a data professional actually can measure the business impacts of a data management practice like MDM. Let's imagine a world where you say, okay, if I improve your data quality, your customer data by 5%, what will that drive? The business comes back and says, okay, well, I've maybe you sit down with people in your FP&A group, financial planning and analysis. Those are really generally good people to work with on the business side. Sit down with them and say, hey, if I did this, what do you think would happen over here? If they came back and said, you know what, I think that we could drive a 3% increase in our net profitability next year, or 1%, or a 0.5%, doesn't matter. There'd be a number associated to that.
Right.
Based off of a fairly conservative 5% improvement. Right. The challenge we run into in the world of data and analytics across the board, whether this is MDM or data quality or governance, oddly, we tend to look at the world through very deterministic lenses. We tend to look at the world through these all or nothing propositions that don't serve us very, very well. I've spoken to literally hundreds of data professionals who think that to get any value out of MDM, you must clean up your data first. But if you built a model that said, hey, you know what, with a 5% improvement, I can drive $1 million in revenue. You don't need to get to 100%. You don't need to clean up all the data. You can price in, the
Right.
phrase I use is you can price in the fact that maybe some of your data is not good,
Mhm.
but if you still drive 5%, will it still be worth it to the business? Absolutely, it's still worth it to the business. So
Yeah.
I'm not saying we need to forget data quality. I'm not suggesting that data cleanups are always a bad idea. I'm just saying proceed with caution. And let's start with driving value. Let's start with giving up the idea of perfection because it never happen. Let's put a bias to action and have that bias be driving value and not
Exactly.
not a data cleanup.
Exactly. Well, perfect is the enemy of good, right?
Yep.
Or as with all things. So in order to achieve this, you've also written a lot about a customer-centric data organization and a product data-centric organization. Can you describe what you mean by that?
Well, a lot of this is very much a reaction to the hype these days around data products, and which I think is the only leftover, the surviving leftover of the data mesh.
Yep.
Is data products, and I'm not trying to disparage data products because I think it's a good idea with one caveat, and that caveat is data products, created under a discipline of product management. If we are serious about products, then we must necessarily be serious about product management.
Love
I mentioned I've got almost 20 years of experience in product leadership. I know the value of good product management. I know the value of good product design. We all do. We're probably carrying it around in our pockets. That's good product design.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, literally revolutionized how I'm holding up a cell phone, by the way, everybody who's listening. It's like, what is he doing? I'm holding up my touch screen on my cell phone. That's good product design, right? So product management is well established and it's established discipline. And there is so much we can learn in the world of data and analytics around product management. And it starts with putting the customer at the center of everything you do. Customer. And I use that word purposefully, not stakeholder, not end user, just customer. Start there.
Exactly. And then you also describe sort of in this continuum, and you have some beautiful organizational diagrams, which if you're willing to, we can share as part of this podcast. We'll weave them in. But the shifting left and shifting right, right? You describe sort of this notion. Tell us a little bit about that. And then also, as sort of an adjunct to your comments around having product management for data, which I love, are there any unique skills that these product managers need to have?
Yes. But let's start with this. Let's start with the shift left and shift right. So there's a lot of debate these days on what is a data product.
Yeah.
And there isn't a single definition. I have one of mine, and I'll share that in a bit. But the idea of data products, at least to data professionals, exists in this spectrum. On the left-hand side, data products, this is what I call shift left, are closely aligned to business applications. They are the kind of the lowest atomic unit of something that potentially could be delivering value. It could be a field, it could be an attribute, it could be even a join on a table, who knows, but the lowest kind of atomic level of what I would call is really a raw material. Where a lot of the people on the left-hand side of the spectrum see data products as things that are used as materials that go into building some sort of analytical product, right?
The concept of your data supply chain.
Exactly. Exactly. That's a great metaphor. It's this kind of it's more like a raw material, like a supply would be. A lot of people view data products through that lens, and that kind of aligns to the way that the data mesh looks at the data products. On the right-hand side of the spectrum is a finished product that is good to go, that is consumer ready, that is trustworthy and accurate. And here's the key part of my definition of a product is solving a specific customer problem or a specific customer need where, and that customer would be otherwise willing to pay for that product.
Right.
I don't want to get into a whole bunch of back and forth on like internal accounting and GAAP, and it's not really an asset. And we fall down these rabbit holes way too easily. But conceptually, imagine yourself as a CDO, you're running a store, and your storefront maybe is even your data catalog, and you've got things that you're trying to sell. In a perfect world, if you had to run that store as a P&L, profit and loss, could you?
Yeah.
Like, it's an interesting thought exercise. And I think that's a wonderful North Star for CDOs to just kind of keep in the back of their mind, which is, if people had to pay for this, would they? And if you take that mindset, it drastically changes everything. You're not an overhead. You're not a service desk. You are out there to solve customer needs. That's the right-hand side of this, what I'm calling this kind of this data product spectrum. That's where I think we should aspire to be. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't also be in the left-hand side, because you could argue you need those raw materials to produce good data products. So one is not exclusive of the other. They can coexist. But I would argue you need to do both as a CDO. Sometimes you're producing raw materials. Maybe you've got data scientists that don't need training, that can take that data and do something with it, and they don't need a lot of handholding, and self-service is totally fine for them. But for other customers, maybe they need a little bit more of a bespoke, customized product experience, and both are correct. Your question was, are there skills that are unique? Absolutely. Product management is a unique skill set. It's a unique skill set. And I would argue, I've had this discussion, people ask, can I train my data stewards to be data product owners? Well, you could try, but it's going to be a major investment. And I would argue there's a very, very different mindset. Product managers are a unique skill with a unique mindset, with a unique way of looking at things. And all else being equal, I would go out and hire a skilled product manager, because training a product manager on data will be way easier than taking a data person and training them on product management.
That is really, really great insight. So relative to the data products, right? How do you see these playing with the traditional way data governance is viewed, right? Because we started the beginning of this conversation around people are over-indexing on data governance, really sort of making sure that everything's locked down, secure. There's a lot of reasons for that in terms of accessibility to the data and sort of permissions and so forth, and privacy. But how does data products and data governance come together in your mind?
Yeah, I just had a post on this earlier this week on LinkedIn. Thank you, Ramon, kind of calling that out. We have 20 years of data, give or take 20 years. We've got about 20 years of data to suggest that the status quo of data governance is not working. It's not working. And Einstein would tell us that if we keep doubling down on the status quo and expecting different results, well, then that's on us.
Yeah.
So I think we need to be looking at data governance in a very, very different way. I think we need to pivot data governance away from what most people believe to be a control function to more of an enablement and business success and customer success function. Easier said than done. Right? There's a lot of work to be done here, but it does start with putting the customer at the center. It also involves product management. It involves shunning these kind of all or nothing, highly deterministic ways of thinking about data quality and embracing more probabilistic ways of looking at things. It involves looking at things through the lens of context and acknowledging what is true to one may not be true to everybody. Getting away from these monolithic framework-driven approaches. Don't get me wrong. I love DAMA. I love the DMBOK. It's a wonderful framework. You will never find one that is more exhaustive and more inclusive. It's fantastic. But when we take a framework-driven approach, when we take a control-driven approach, the end result necessarily of that, the end result will be the minimum. The organization will do the minimum required simply to keep the regulators happy. Right? If this is all about control, then what you will find, and what we have found this over and over again, is you'll get the minimum. We won't get sued. We won't break the law. We'll maintain PII. We'll be HIPAA compliant and GDPR compliant. That's the minimum bar, but we won't get much above that. And that's strictly a function of us approaching this through control and not enablement. A lot of things we can do. I'm working on a book on this right now. We'll publish it next year. But it's an uphill battle, but we need to revisit how we think about governance.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for the longest time, a lot of governance was sold for people to stay out of jail. I call that the third leg of the stool, right? You either want to make money, save money, or stay out of jail. Those are the three things that kind of drive people's incentives in business, right? Yeah. So this is super interesting. Let's bring it all together and some of the newer technologies, right? So as you know, Excel Data is in the business of data observability. It's a new topic. Some of your former colleagues at Gartner have created a category. It's not quite to a Magic Quadrant status. The first market guide came out. What's your, putting your sort of hat on and industry lens and what you're seeing about data observability, its relationship to master data management, at Profisee? What are you seeing?
So I tend to look at data observability a little more philosophically. and this maybe isn't where you wanted to take the conversation,
That's
but
fine.
I mean, to me, from a kind of a nuts and bolts perspective, yeah, check. I mean, data observability just makes complete and total sense, right? You don't want your pipelines failing in the middle of the night for all
Yep.
sorts of different reasons. And the more you can be proactive on that instead of reactive, the better you're going to be. The better your organization's going to be, the happier your customers are going to be, and you're going to get more sleep as somebody who's running a data function. So,
Yes.
to me, that's kind of like data observability 101. Value prop is there. Value prop is clear. Totally get it. But where I get into the philosophical is I kind of view the things that you're doing in the world of data observability as a little bit of a trial balloon as to where I think the data management function needs to go.
Exactly.
The entire data management function.
Exactly.
And what do I mean by that? If we can build, whether it's ML or whether it's AI-based solutions, I don't know, and you don't need to talk about your proprietary IP, but if we can build technology that can predict when a data pipeline is very likely to fail,
exactly,
we most certainly can do the exact same thing to predict when a business process will fail.
Mhm.
Quote to cash, procure to pay. We can build process to understand when data quality is good and when data quality is bad, when data quality is fit for purpose and when it may not be fit for purpose. We can start to be consultative to our business customers and say, hey, listen, yes, I understand that this process may be running, but you run the risk of another process actually not running because we have deployed this solution that tells us this data is problematic to a downstream process. So, and we can start to predict some of these things, and we can start to measure some of these things. So I love what's happening in data observability because I think that is where we need to go
that's
writ
where we're
large,
going.
where
Yep.
it starts to look a little bit like some of the original, and I use the word original, vision that Gartner had behind the data fabric.
Yes.
So I would argue that in the last year or so, maybe that vision has been pasteurized a little bit. Maybe folks in Gartner would disagree with me, particularly Mark Beyer, Eder Samzadi, and a few others. But I think the vision has been pasteurized a little bit. But Mark Beyer, his original vision for the fabric, I would argue, and if he's listening, his ears are probably perking, was a world where we get to a place where data can start to inform its own classification and use.
Yeah,
where transactional data, metadata, every data that we've got, when we run AI on it, not just Gen AI, but all sorts of other AI, can we get to the point where the data can start to tell us, vis-a-vis what Gartner would call some form of recommendation engine, probably Gen AI, by the way, some form of recommendation engine where the data can start to tell us, hey, here's what a good data model looks like. Hey, here's what some data quality rules look like.
Exactly.
And to me, that future state, the closest thing that we have today to that is data observability.
And that's exactly it. I just spoke to Mark actually a couple of months ago. Actually, I've spoken to him about 3 times over the last 6 months. But his sort of drive and the entire Gartner sort of research team are indexing on this on active metadata. I know you like that word, right? Yeah, but the active metadata, right? But data observability is increasingly not just being used to enforce data quality and then alert when pipelines are breaking, but it's gathering all that active metadata to see when things are anomalous and then actually spot patterns to identify data products. What would be a good data product candidate based on the consumption, usage, who cares about it, what's the value, all of that good stuff, right? And then from that, it takes a secondary role post-development to enforce the SLAs on the data contract. So all of these things are kind of coming to roost, but I love the way you described it in terms of how we should think about it.
The data contracts, that's interesting. I was at a conference last week in Canada, and Chad Sanderson, kind of data contracts guru, spoke at that. I've long been a believer of data contracts, going back to when we used to call them WSDLs. And I'm being a little bit glib here, but I love that concept as well for external uses of data, particularly kind of data monetization and external uses of data. I actually happen to think that blockchain potentially could play a role here down the road. But every time I mention blockchain,
well, your old pal, sort of Doug Laney used to write a lot about monetization.
Interesting. Well, so people kind of look at me like I'm crazy when I start talking about blockchain and data management, but. But Gartner, active metadata, totally and completely agree. And we are fast approaching a world where this is not necessarily pie in the sky, right?
Yeah.
It's not necessarily pie in the sky. There are groups that are out there that are kind of doing these things, but in very, very kind of in very small, limited scopes, where they are solving one business problem or two business problems,
Yeah.
where they're doing it through kind of services engagement, where they are running knowledge graphs. They're building what I would kind of call what starts to look like more of a next generation semantic layer, which would include necessarily some idea of the capabilities of data observability. So we are fast approaching this world. It is future state, but it is most certainly, I think, where we are going, because we have to go there. Right, we have to go there. Our businesses are demanding it, and AI demands it. So it's a win-win.
Fantastic, Malcolm. It's been an absolute pleasure. Time flies when you're having fun, and I really, really appreciate you coming on. And hope you'll come on again. And my goal is to be 100th as successful with this podcast series as CDO Matters is. You're the gold standard, obviously, and it's just a pleasure, and I hope to speak to you soon.
Likewise, it's been my honor to be here, and I hope you'll invite me back. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Malcolm. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Data Forward podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest insider news, be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you next time.